A gunshot of silence. A penthouse drenched in danger. Her hands trembling on his ruined shirt, blood that isn't hers staining her fingers. He grips her wrist, not to hurt her, but to keep her from running. Don't, he breathes, eyes wild with something he's never felt before. In that single second, the most feared man in Seoul forgets every rule he's ever lived by. If you believe love can survive even the darkest empire, smash that like button right now, subscribe before the next scene hits, and comment "I'm staying till the end," because tonight, you watch a monster fall in love. Seoul never slept, and neither did Kang Min-ho. At 34, he ran half the shipping ports on the western coast, 3 nightclubs that laundered more than music, and a name that made grown men check twice before they spoke. People called him many things behind closed doors: predator, ghost, the devil of Uedo, but never to his face. Nobody dared. His penthouse office sat 40 floors above the city, glass walls overlooking a kingdom he had built from nothing but fear and precision. Tonight, like every night, he stood at the window with a glass of untouched whiskey, watching the lights flicker like 1,000 small eyes. Then the door opened. "Mr. Khan, you're 3 o'clock," the voice cut off. A stack of files hit the floor with a slap, papers scattering like startled birds. He turned, irritation already curling his mouth, and stopped. She was on her knees gathering the papers, cheeks flushed pink with embarrassment, dark curls falling loose from a hastily pinned bun. She was not the type of woman who usually stood in his office. She was soft where his world was sharp, warm where everything around him ran cold. Her body curved generously beneath her blazer, and something about the way she bit her lip in frustration, not fear, frustration, made his chest do something it hadn't done in years. "I'm so sorry, sir," she said, scrambling upright, clutching the files to her chest like armor. "I'm Zuri. I was told to start today. The agency said someone would brief me, but no one." "No one briefed you," he said flatly, "because no one survives long enough in this office to brief anyone." Her eyes lifted to his, startled, and then, instead of the trembling fear he expected, she laughed. A short, disbelieving huff of a laugh. Well, that's reassuring. For the first time in longer than he could remember, Kang Min-ho felt the corner of his mouth twitch upward against his will. The next morning, the office buzzed with quiet warnings passed between assistants like contraband. Don't make eye contact. Don't ask questions. Don't be late. Zuri absorbed all of it with a calm nod, even as her stomach knotted with nerves. She hadn't wanted this job. 6 months of unemployment had a way of stripping away choice. The agency had said private executive assistant, not assistant to a man who looked like he could end a war with one phone call. When she stepped into his office at exactly 9, he was already seated, sleeves rolled to his forearms, signing documents without looking up. "You're punctual," he said. "Good. I don't repeat myself, and I don't tolerate excuses." "Understood, sir." "Coffee. Black. No sugar." A pause. "And get yourself something. You skipped breakfast." She blinked. "How did you?" "Your hands were shaking when you picked up the papers yesterday." "Low blood sugar, not fear." He finally looked up, dark eyes unreadable. "Don't skip meals in my building. I won't have anyone fainting on my floor." It wasn't kindness, not exactly. But it wasn't cruelty either, and that contradiction unsettled her more than anything. By the end of the week, Zuri had learned the rhythm of him, the silences that meant think before you speak, the way his jaw ticked when a deal soured, the rare half-smile that appeared only when she made a sharp comment he didn't expect. She told herself it meant nothing. He was her boss. A terrifying, devastatingly handsome boss who happened to notice when she forgot to eat. That didn't mean anything. Except it did, a little, when he started leaving a sandwich on her desk every morning without comment. Or when he rerouted an entire meeting because she'd mentioned, once, in passing, that the conference room on the 30th floor made her dizzy from the height. "You moved the meeting," she said one afternoon, stunned, staring at the new room assignment. The view was distracting. he said without looking up from his laptop, which was, demonstrably, a lie. The new room had no windows at all. She didn't push it. But she smiled the rest of the day, and she couldn't say why. The following morning brought a different kind of test, one that had nothing to do with rivals or danger, and everything to do with the quiet ache of comparing herself to a world she didn't belong in. The company held its quarterly investor breakfast in the penthouse's private dining room, and Zuri had been asked to coordinate seating, catering, and a dozen other details that left her sprinting between departments since 6 in the morning. By the time the guests arrived, she stood near the back wall in her plainest blazer, watching a parade of effortlessly polished women glide past in tailored silk, looks of polite curiosity flickering toward her like she'd wandered in from the wrong building. "You don't fit the room," murmured one of the investor's wives, not unkindly, just carelessly, the way people speak when they assume no one is really listening. "I wonder why he keeps her around." Zuri's chest tightened, old wounds she'd carried since childhood rising fast and unwelcome. She busied herself refilling water glasses, telling herself it didn't matter, that she was here to do a job, not to be admired. She didn't notice Minho watching from across the room until he was suddenly beside her, close enough that his voice could carry to no one but her. "Walk with me," he said quietly. "I have seating charts to finish." "They can wait 2 minutes." There was something steady and certain in his tone that made her set down the water pitcher and follow him to the hallway just outside the dining room. "What's wrong?" she asked, bracing for criticism about the breakfast logistics. Instead, his hand found hers, thumb tracing slow, grounding circles against her knuckles. "I heard what that woman said." Her stomach dropped. "Minho, it's fine, I wasn't." "It's not fine," he said simply. "And I need you to hear me say this once, clearly, so you never doubt it again. You are the only person in that entire room who isn't performing something. Every other person in there is wearing a mask cut to fit somebody else's idea of value. You walked in wearing exactly who you are, and it terrifies people who've spent their whole lives pretending. That woman doesn't understand why I keep you around because she has never once been looked at the way I look at you. That's not your failure. That's hers." Zuri's eyes stung, throat too tight to answer right away. "You don't have to fit the room," he added, softer now, lifting her hand to press a brief, warm kiss against her knuckles, right there where anyone might see if they looked. "The room should be grateful you walked into it." She laughed wetly, swiping at her eyes before her mascara could betray her. "You're going to make me cry in front of investors." "Cry later. Right now, go finish dazzling everyone with seating charts. I have an entire room to manage, and apparently a debt I now owe my own assistant for being the only honest thing in it." She returned to the breakfast standing a little taller, and when she caught his eye across the room 20 minutes later, the smile he gave her was small, private, meant for no one but her. A few days later, the trouble started, the kind of trouble that came wrapped in expensive cologne and a venomous smile. Seo Junwoo, a rival businessman with a reputation almost as dark as Minho's, arrived for a supposed partnership meeting. He lingered in the lobby long after his appointment ended, leaning against Zuri's desk with the easy confidence of a man who'd never been told no. "You're new," he said, eyes raking over her in a way that made her skin crawl. "Minho's taste has improved. Have dinner with me tonight." "I'm working," she said evenly, though her pulse spiked with discomfort. "Everyone has an hour." "She doesn't," came a low voice from the doorway. Junwoo's smile faltered as Minho stepped into view, calm as still water and twice as dangerous. "I was just being friendly to your assistant, Minho." "No need to glare." "You've had your meeting," Minho said. "Leave." Junwoo left, laughing under his breath, but the tension didn't leave with him. Minho stood there a long moment, hands flexed at his sides, something dark and possessive simmering behind his eyes before he caught himself and smoothed it away. "Are you all right?" he asked her, voice quieter now. "I'm fine," she said. "I can handle myself." "I know you can." His gaze lingered. "I just don't want you to have to." She didn't know what to do with the way her heart lurched at that. That evening, working late on a report, Zuri stayed behind after the office emptied. She didn't notice Minho still in his office until she heard his door open. "You're still here," he said. "So are you." He leaned in the doorway, tie loosened, looking less like the devil of Uedo and more like a tired man carrying a weight too heavy for one person. "Go home, Zuri. You first." A flicker of something almost amused crossed his face. "Are you negotiating with me? Apparently I learn from the best." He laughed, a real laugh, low and surprised, like it had been startled out of him. It transformed his whole face, softened the hard lines, and for one unguarded second, Zuri saw the man beneath the empire. Someone lonelier than anyone in this glass tower would ever guess. "Come on," he said, grabbing his coat. "I'll take you home." "That's not necessary." "It is," he said, the warmth in his voice replaced by quiet command. "It's late, and Junwoo doesn't let things go easily." "I'm not asking, Zuri." She should have argued. She didn't. The car ride was silent except for the hum of rain against the windshield. Zuri watched the city blur past the window, achingly aware of how close he sat, of the warmth radiating from his side of the car, of the way his hand rested on the seat between them like he was holding himself back from something. "Can I ask you something?" she said finally. "You can ask." "I might not answer." "Why do you care if Junwoo bothers me?" "I'm just your assistant." His jaw tightened. For a moment she thought he wouldn't answer at all. Then, quietly, almost like a confession dragged out of him against his will, "You're not just anything to me anymore." "I don't know when that happened." "I don't particularly like that it happened." "But it did." Her breath caught. The car had stopped outside her building, and neither of them moved. "Minho." "Don't," he said softly, eyes fixed forward. "If you say my name like that again, I won't be responsible for what I do next." She should have opened the door. Instead, she turned toward him, heart hammering. "What if I want you to be irresponsible? Just once?" His head turned slowly toward her, dark eyes searching hers like he was looking for a trap, a joke, a reason to stop himself. He found none. "Zuri," he murmured, voice rough, and the way he said her name this time was nothing like before. It was reverent, hungry, terrified of wanting something this much. His hand lifted, fingers brushing along her jaw with a tenderness that didn't match the rumors about him at all. "Every bit of you is sweet," he whispered. "It's going to ruin me." The space between them disappeared. The kiss was slow at first, careful, like he was afraid she'd vanish if he moved too fast, and then it deepened, full of weeks of restraint breaking apart all at once. She felt the difference between the man the world feared and the man trembling slightly as he held her face like something precious. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, he rested his forehead against hers. "This complicates everything," he murmured. "I know. I don't regret it." "Neither do I." The next morning, things shifted in ways neither of them spoke aloud but both felt. He still corrected her reports, still barked the occasional order, but his eyes followed her differently now, lingering a half-second too long, softening when she wasn't looking, sharpening with something close to jealousy whenever a male coworker so much as greeted her warmly. It came to a head a week later when an old colleague of hers, a charming junior accountant named David, stopped by her desk with flowers just to welcome her to the building, lingering far longer than professional courtesy required. Minho watched the entire exchange from his office doorway, arms crossed, expression carved from stone. When David finally left, Minho's voice cut through the bullpen like a blade. "Zuri. My office. Now." She followed him in, closing the door behind her, half amused, half wary at the storm brewing in his expression. "You're going to fire him for bringing flowers?" "I'm considering it." "Minho. Don't smile at me like that," he said, stepping closer, voice low and rough with restrained jealousy. "I don't share well. I never have. And watching another man look at you like he has a chance." "He doesn't have a chance," she said softly, closing the distance herself, hand resting against his chest where she could feel his heart pounding despite his calm exterior. Because I'm already completely, hopelessly yours. The way his arms wrapped around her then, almost desperate, told her everything words couldn't. The David incident, as Zuri privately called it, didn't end there. The following week, an unexpected envelope arrived at her desk, no return address, just her name written in careful handwriting she didn't recognize. Inside was a single ticket to an art exhibit downtown, along with a short note. I know your boss probably scared me off, but I think you're worth the risk. D. She stared at it, more bewildered than flattered, fully intending to toss it the moment she got a free minute. Unfortunately, free minutes in Minho's office were rare, and the envelope sat in plain view on her desk just long enough for the wrong person to notice it. What is this? Minho asked that afternoon, voiced deceptively even as he held up the ticket between two fingers like it was something faintly distasteful. Minho, you can't just go through my desk. I wasn't going through your desk. It was sitting open for the entire building to see. His jaw was tight, a muscle ticking at the corner. Are you going? No, she said, snatching it back. I was going to throw it away. I haven't even responded to him. Good. A pause. Then, quieter, almost reluctant, why does he keep trying? Because some men don't understand the word no, she said simply. And because he doesn't know what I know. What's that? She stepped closer, resting her hand flat against his chest, feeling the way his heartbeat picked up beneath her palm despite his carefully composed expression. That I already gave my no, and my yes, to someone else entirely. He's wasting a stamp. The tension in his shoulders melted, replaced by something warmer, almost sheepish. I don't like sharing what's mine, he admitted. Even when it's never really been his to begin with. I know, she said, smiling. It's terribly inconvenient, being loved by a man who alphabetizes his jealousy. I do not alphabetize my jealousy. You absolutely do. David's somewhere near the top of a very long list. He huffed something close to a laugh, pulling her into him properly this time, lips finding her temple. Burn the ticket, he murmured. Please. For my sanity. She did, that very evening, dropping it into the kitchen sink and watching the paper curl into ash with no small amount of satisfaction, not because he'd asked, but because some choices, she realized, were simply easy to make when you already knew exactly where your heart belonged. That weekend, in a gesture that startled her more than any grand declaration could have, Minho showed up at her apartment uninvited, dressed down in a plain charcoal sweater instead of his usual tailored suits, looking almost like an ordinary man instead of the legend Soul whispered about. You look terrified, she said, opening the door, unable to hide her amusement at the sight of him standing there with a paper bag in one hand and obvious nerves written across his face. I don't know how to do this part, he admitted, holding up the bag like an offering. The normal part. I bought groceries. I don't know what I thought. That maybe we could just cook something. Together. Like people who aren't constantly being chased by scandal or rivals. Her heart melted on the spot. Kang Minho wants a quiet night in. Kang Minho wants a quiet night in with you, he corrected, stepping inside almost sheepishly. Specifically. The quiet part is negotiable. The you part is not. What followed was the most unguarded evening either of them had shared, flour dusted across his expensive sweater, laughter filling her small kitchen as he fumbled hopelessly with a knife he clearly hadn't held in years, the easy domesticity of two people discovering each other beyond boardrooms and danger. He told her, quietly, over a meal that turned out only passably edible, about a childhood spent mostly alone, raised by staff while his father built the empire Minho eventually inherited, taught early that affection was a liability and softness got people killed in his world. You never had anyone who just liked being around you, she asked gently, sitting cross-legged on her second-hand couch, his head resting in her lap as she absently traced patterns through his hair. Not until you fell on my office floor with an armful of files, he said, eyes closed, voice unusually soft. I think I fell in love with you somewhere between you laughing at me and you correcting a contract clause I'd missed 3 times. I just didn't have a name for it yet." She leaned down, pressing a slow, lingering kiss to his forehead, savoring the rare vulnerability of this version of him, the one no boardroom, no rival, no rumor ever got to see. "Stay," she murmured. "Just for tonight. No danger. No scandal. Just this." He stayed. And for the first time in either of their lives, an ordinary evening felt like the most extraordinary thing either of them had ever been given. But peace never lasted long in his world. A few days later, his older cousin, Han Sung-jun, a man with old grudges and older debts, arrived at the office unannounced, demanding a private audience. Minho's face went carefully blank the moment Sung-jun's name was announced, the kind of stillness that Zuri had learned meant danger. She wasn't allowed in the meeting. She waited outside instead, pulse thudding, watching the door like it might splinter open at any second. When Minho finally emerged an hour later, his face was pale beneath its usual composure. "What happened?" she asked immediately. "Nothing you need to worry about." "Minho, don't shut me out." He hesitated, a rare crack in his armor, before exhaling and pulling her gently into the privacy of his office. "My cousin believes I've grown soft. Distracted. He's threatening to expose certain business dealings to a rival family unless I step aside and let him take control of the Western ports. That sounds like blackmail." "It is blackmail." His hand came up to cradle her cheek, thumb brushing along her cheekbone with a tenderness that contradicted the danger crackling beneath his words. "And he made it very clear that he considers you the reason for my so-called weakness." Fear, cold and sharp, speared through her chest. "Minho, if I'm putting you in danger—" "You're not the danger," he said fiercely, pulling her against him. "You're the only good thing in my entire life. I will handle Sung-jun. I will handle all of it. But I need you to trust me." "I do trust you," she whispered against his collar. "I'm just afraid of losing you before I even really had you." "You won't lose me," he murmured into her hair. "I've spent my whole life building walls so nothing could touch me. You walked straight through them without even trying. I'm not letting that go because my cousin is greedy." That evening, in a moment that neither of them had planned, the weight of fear and longing tipped into something neither could hold back any longer. Minho had insisted on driving her home again, security, he claimed, though they both knew it was an excuse to extend the night a little longer. Inside her small apartment, rain tapping softly against the windows, the air between them grew thick with everything unsaid. "You should go," she said quietly, though her hands were fisted in his shirt, holding him there instead of letting him leave. "I should," he agreed, not moving an inch, his forehead resting against hers, breath shaky in a way she'd never heard from him before. "I've never wanted to stay anywhere as much as I want to stay here." "Then stay." He searched her face for a long moment, for hesitation, for doubt, for any reason to pull back and protect her from the chaos of his world. He found none. What he found instead undid him completely, her hand sliding up to rest over his racing heart, her eyes soft and open and utterly unafraid despite everything she now knew about the danger surrounding him. "Zuri," he breathed, voice cracking slightly on her name. "If I stay, I won't be able to pretend anymore that you're not the only thing keeping me human." "Then don't pretend," she whispered. "Just stay." The kiss that followed was different from before, slower, deeper, stripped of restraint, full of every fear and every longing neither of them had dared speak aloud. The lights stayed dim. The rain kept falling. And somewhere in the quiet hours of that night, two people who had spent their lives building armor against the world finally let it fall away completely, finding in each other something neither had believed they deserved: warmth, safety, a love so consuming it frightened them both. Morning came too soon, sunlight slipping golden through the curtains, and with it came the fear that had been waiting patiently in the corners of Zuri's heart all night. She woke before he did, staring at the ceiling, panic creeping in where peace should have been. What if this was just a moment for him? What if last night changes nothing? What if I've given him everything and he walks away like men like him always do? By the time he stood beside her, she was already dressed, already retreating behind the same careful professionalism she'd worn the day they met. "Zuri?" His voice was rough with sleep, brows drawing together at the sight of her fully dressed, bag already on her shoulder. "I should get to the office early," she said, not meeting his eyes. "There's a lot to catch up on." "Zuri." He sat up, alarm cutting through the sleepy warmth in his voice. "Talk to me." "What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong. Her voice cracked, betraying the calm she was trying so hard to project. "I need some air." "I'll see you at work." She left before he could stop her, practically running down the stairwell instead of waiting for the elevator, tears she refused to let fall burning behind her eyes the entire way. She didn't go to the office. Instead, she went to the small cafe 2 blocks from her apartment, the one with the cracked window booth where she used to sit during her unemployed months, trying to convince herself everything would work out. She sat there now, coffee going cold in front of her, phone buzzing relentlessly in her bag. Minho called 17 times in the span of an hour. Then the call stopped, and a single message arrived instead. "I'm not going to stop looking until I find you. I need you to know that." She turned her phone face down on the table, pressing the heels of her hands against her eyes. He's going to get tired of chasing. Men like him always do eventually. Better to leave now than to fall apart later when he realizes I'm not worth the trouble. She didn't notice the bell above the cafe door ring. She didn't notice the sudden hush that fell over the small space. She only looked up when a shadow fell across her table and found Minho standing there, chest heaving like he'd run the entire way, tie askew, eyes wild with something rawer than anger. "Don't," he said, before she could even open her mouth. "Don't tell me you're fine. Don't tell me this was a mistake. I have spent the last 2 hours tearing through every cafe and bus stop between your apartment and the office because the thought of you disappearing from my life terrified me more than anything my cousin has ever threatened. Minho. I'm not finished." He dropped into the seat across from her, hands trembling slightly as he reached for hers across the table. "I know what last night meant to you might be different from what it meant to me. I know you're scared I'll wake up one day and decide you weren't enough, or that this was just convenient. But Zuri," his voice broke slightly. "I have built an empire out of never needing anyone. And in less than a month, you unraveled every single wall I spent 15 years constructing. I am not running from that. I am terrified of it, but I am not running." Tears spilled over despite her best efforts to hold them back. "I was scared," she admitted in a whisper. "I've spent my whole life being the woman men are fine with, never the one they fight for. I didn't know what to do with how much last night meant to me, so I ran before you could prove me right. I will spend every single day proving you wrong," he said fiercely, lifting her hand to press a kiss against her knuckles. "You are not someone I'm fine with, Zuri. You are the only thing in this entire city that has ever felt like it was mine to protect simply because I wanted to, not because it was strategic or useful. Every bit of you is sweet, and I intend on keeping every bit of you, for as long as you'll let me." She let out a wet, disbelieving laugh, wiping her cheeks. "That's the second time you've said that to me. It won't be the last." His thumb brushed away a stray tear at her cheekbone, lingering there like he couldn't quite believe he was allowed to touch her like this, openly, in front of strangers who had stopped pretending not to stare. "Do you know what I did the moment I realized you'd left? I called every driver in my fleet. I had security pull footage from your building's lobby camera. I walked into 3 cafes before this one, and the owner of the second actually threatened to call the police because apparently a wild-eyed man in a half-buttoned shirt asking after a woman named Zuri looks exactly as alarming as it sounds." A startled laugh escaped her despite the tears still drying on her cheeks. "You didn't." "I did. I have no shame left where you're concerned. None." His expression sobered, voice dropping low and earnest. "I am not a patient man, Zuri. I have never once in my life chased after anything I couldn't simply acquire through money or fear. You are the first thing that ever made me run, actually run, through traffic, past my own driver who kept shouting that he could just bring the car around. I didn't care. I needed to find you faster than the car could get me there. That's a little unhinged, she said softly, though her heart was hammering with an entirely different kind of fear now, the good kind, the kind that came from being wanted this completely. Profoundly unhinged, he agreed. I'd do it again tomorrow if you ran from me again. I'd do it every day for the rest of my life if that's what it took for you to finally believe I'm not leaving. She studied his face for a long moment, the exhaustion under his eyes, the genuine fear that hadn't fully receded yet, the rawness of a man who'd spent his entire adult life curating an image of untouchable calm now sitting in a cracked window cafe with his tie undone, not caring who saw him fall apart over her. Okay, she finally whispered. Okay? Okay, I believe you. She turned her hand to properly clasp his, fingers lacing through his with quiet certainty. I'm done running, Min-ho. I was just scared. I'm not anymore. It won't be the last, he murmured, leaning across the table to press his lips gently to her forehead. Come back with me. Not to the office. Just come back to me. By the following week, word of their relationship had spread through every level of Min-ho's organization, and not everyone took it kindly. Whispers followed Zuri through the halls, some curious, some openly resentful, convinced she had somehow trapped one of the most powerful men in Seoul with nothing but soft eyes and kind words. She bore it with quiet dignity, refusing to let the whispers shrink her. Min-ho, for his part, made his position devastatingly clear at the next company gathering. Standing at the front of the room, glass raised, his eyes found Zuri across the crowd before he spoke. Some of you have questions about recent changes in my personal life, he said, voice carrying easily through the silent room. Let me answer them clearly, so there's no confusion going forward. Zuri is not a temporary distraction. She is not someone to be tolerated or whispered about. She is the woman I intend to spend my life with, and anyone who has a problem with that is welcome to find employment elsewhere. The room went utterly silent. Zuri's cheeks burned crimson, equal parts mortified and overwhelmed with love for the man unafraid to claim her in front of an audience that had built careers on fear and discretion. Later that night, alone in his penthouse, she pressed her forehead to his chest, laughing helplessly. You couldn't have just told them quietly? Where would the fun be in that? He tilted her chin up, smile soft despite the teasing in his tone. I told you. I don't share well. Now everyone knows exactly where they stand. Han Sung-jun, however, did not relent so easily. A week later, he returned, not with threats this time, but with a different kind of weapon entirely, doubt, dressed up as concern. He arranged to accidentally run into Zuri at a charity gala Min-ho had been called away from at the last minute due to an urgent business matter. You should know, Sung-jun said smoothly, swirling wine in his glass, Min-ho has a history of intense, short relationships. Women who believed they were different. They never lasted past a few months. Zuri kept her expression carefully neutral, though her stomach twisted with old insecurities resurfacing. Is there a reason you're telling me this? Because I think you deserve to know what you're walking into, he said, feigning gentleness. He's brilliant. Dangerous. But he doesn't know how to love something without eventually destroying it. I'd hate to see that happen to someone as lovely as you. It was a calculated blow, designed to plant seeds of fear right where they'd take root easiest. And for a moment, walking home alone that night, Zuri let herself wonder, what if he's right? What if I'm just the latest in a long line of women who believed they were different? But when she arrived home, she found Min-ho already waiting outside her apartment door, having rushed back the moment his meeting ended, arms immediately opening for her despite the exhaustion etched into his face. I'm sorry I couldn't be there tonight, he murmured into her ear. Did Sung-jun bother you? Security told me he was at the gala. She hesitated only a second before deciding honesty mattered more than pride. He told me about your past relationships. Said you don't know how to love something without destroying it eventually. Min-ho went very still, jaw tightening with quiet fury, not at her, she realized, but at the manipulation itself. My cousin, he said carefully, has spent years trying to make me believe I'm incapable of softness, Because a man who feels nothing is easier to control and manipulate into making reckless business decisions. The relationships before you were never real, Zuri. They were arrangements. Strategic, convenient, hollow. I never once felt for any of them what I feel watching you fall asleep with your hand on my chest like you trust me completely with something fragile. I do trust you, she whispered. Then trust this, he said, framing her face in his hands. I am not destroying you. I am building something with you, slowly, carefully, for the first time in my life with someone I actually want to keep, not someone I need to keep for appearances. Sung Joon is afraid of what we have because it's the one thing in my life he can't manipulate or control. That fear is going to be his undoing, not ours. That fear proved prophetic sooner than either of them expected. 2 weeks later, Sung Joon made his final move, not through threats, but through a carefully orchestrated business scandal designed to implicate Min Ho in financial fraud he had never committed. Falsified documents surfaced, planted by Sung Joon's allies within the company, suggesting Min Ho had been embezzling from joint accounts for years. The accusation hit every major business outlet within hours. Boards demanded emergency meetings. Partners threatened to withdraw. The empire Min Ho had spent 15 years building teetered on the edge of collapse from a lie skillfully dressed as truth. Zuri watched him absorb blow after blow with the same eerie calm he'd shown the day they met, but underneath it, she could see the cracks, the sleepless nights, the silent fury, the desperate calculations running behind his eyes as he tried to find a way through without losing everything. Let me help, she said one night, finding him still awake at 3 in the morning. Surrounded by documents he'd read so many times the words had probably stopped making sense. This isn't your fight. It is if it's yours, she said simply, sitting beside him. I might not understand shipping logistics or financial statements the way you do, but I'm good with details, Min Ho. Let me look. He hesitated only a moment before sliding the documents toward her, something like relief flickering across his exhausted features. Hours later, poring over timestamps and signature inconsistencies with the same dogged determination she'd once used to keep her old job afloat through impossible odds, Zuri found it, a discrepancy buried in a footnote, a digital signature timestamp during a week Min Ho had documented proof he'd been in Tokyo for negotiations, nowhere near the supposed fraudulent transaction. Min Ho, she said, voice trembling with discovery. Look at this. He stared at the screen, then at her, disbelief slowly transforming into something fierce and grateful. You found it. The one piece of evidence that proves the entire timeline is fabricated. We found it, she corrected gently. He pulled her into his arms right there at the desk, burying his face in her hair, shoulders shaking with quiet, overwhelmed relief. Every bit of you is sweet, he murmured roughly against her temple, but you are also terrifyingly brilliant, and I am the luckiest man alive that you decided to stay. The following morning, armed with irrefutable evidence, Min Ho called an emergency board meeting. Sung Joon arrived expecting victory, smug confidence written across every line of his expression, confidence that crumbled the moment Min Ho laid out the falsified timeline, the doctored documents, and the digital trail leading directly back to accounts Sung Joon himself controlled. The room erupted into chaos. Board members who had been ready to abandon Min Ho now turned hostile eyes towards Sung Joon instead, demanding explanations he had none of. This isn't over, Sung Joon hissed, cornered, his carefully maintained composure finally cracking. It is for you, Min Ho said quietly, no triumph in his voice, only finality. You spent years trying to convince me that love makes a man weak. But it was love that found the proof that saved everything you tried to destroy. You're finished here, Sung Joon. Not because I'm cruel. Because you chose greed over family, and the consequences of that choice belong entirely to you. Sung Joon was escorted out by security, stripped of his position, his reputation in tatters, not through violence, not through revenge, but through the simple, undeniable truth that the woman his cousin loved had outsmarted him completely. The victory, however, didn't stay clean for long. 3 days after the board meeting, while Min Ho was occupied untangling the last threads of the scandal, an elderly woman arrived at the office requesting to see Zuri specifically. Zuri didn't recognize her at first, Not until the woman removed her sunglasses, revealing eyes so similar to Minho's that Zuri's breath caught in her throat. "You don't know me," the woman said, settling into the chair across from Zuri's desk with the unhurried calm of someone used to being obeyed. "But I knew your mother. A long time ago, before either of us had grandchildren old enough to fall in love with each other's families." Zuri's pulse spiked. "I'm sorry, who are you?" "I'm Sua. Minho's grandmother, on his mother's side." The woman's gaze was sharp, assessing, not unkind but undeniably searching. "Your mother worked for my late husband's company 30 years ago, before she left Korea rather suddenly. There were circumstances. Debts owed on both sides that were never properly settled." The words landed like a stone dropped into still water, rippling outward into every corner of Zuri's carefully built new life. "I don't understand what you're telling me." "I'm telling you that you didn't simply fall into my grandson's office by coincidence," Sua said gently. "The agency that placed you here was one I quietly funded myself, after I learned who your mother was and where her daughter had ended up. I wanted to see if the universe might finally balance an old scale. I never expected you two would actually fall in love. That part was entirely your own doing." Zuri sat frozen, mind spinning through implications too large to hold at once. "Does Minho know any of this?" "Not yet. And I would ask that you let me be the one to tell him, in my own way, in my own time." Sua reached across the desk, surprisingly gentle, and took Zuri's hand. "I'm not here to hurt you, child. I'm here because I think you deserve to understand the strange, complicated string of choices that brought you here before anyone else tries to use it against you. People like Sungjun were not the only ones with secrets in this family." Zuri didn't sleep that night, turning the conversation over and over, terrified of what it would mean for Minho to learn that the woman he loved had been quietly placed in his path by his own grandmother, that some thread of fate, or manipulation, or unfinished history had brought them together before either of them had ever chosen it freely. "Does it even matter how we started?" she asked herself in the dark, "if everything we built since has been completely real?" She wanted to believe the answer was no. She was terrified Minho might not feel the same. She didn't have to wait long to find out. Sua, true to her word, requested a private dinner with Minho the following week, and insisted, pointedly, that Zuri attend as well. The restaurant was quiet, traditional, the kind of place that demanded careful words and careful silences in equal measure. Minho listened to his grandmother's explanation with a stillness that frightened Zuri more than any of his usual anger ever had. He didn't interrupt. He didn't raise his voice. He simply sat, jaw tight, hands folded on the table, absorbing every detail of how the woman he loved had arrived in his life through his own family's quiet, decades-old guilt. When Sua finished, the silence stretched unbearably long. "Minho," Zuri said softly, unable to bear it any longer. "Say something." He turned to look at her then, and what she found in his expression wasn't betrayal, wasn't anger, it was something far more vulnerable. "All this time," he said quietly, "I thought finding you was the one thing in my life that had nothing to do with strategy or arrangement. The one pure accident in an entire existence built on calculated moves." "It still was," Zuri said quickly, fear rising in her throat. "Your grandmother opened a door. She didn't walk either of us through it. Everything after that, every conversation, every moment, every single time you chose to stay instead of leave, none of that was arranged. That was just us." He was quiet for a long moment, studying her face like he was relearning something he thought he already knew completely. "You're right," he finally said, voice rough. "A door opening doesn't decide what happens on the other side of it. I decided that. Every single day since you walked into my office, I decided you, again and again, with absolutely no one's permission but my own." His hand found hers across the table, steady despite the storm of revelations around them. "Knowing how we started doesn't undo a single thing about how I feel now. If anything, it makes me grateful to a woman I barely know for accidentally giving me the only good thing I've ever truly wanted." Sua, watching the exchange with a small, satisfied smile, finally spoke again. "I told you wouldn't run," she said to Zuri. Kong men are stubborn that way. Once they decide to love something, no inconvenient truth ever talks them out of it. Zuri laughed despite the tears gathering in her eyes, equal parts relief and overwhelming love. Is that a family trait you're proud of? Immensely, Suwa said, raising her teacup like a toast. Now, tell me everything about the wedding neither of you has planned yet. Later that night, after Suwa had gone home and Minho had fallen asleep on the couch mid-conversation, exhausted from the week's revelations, Zuri sat alone at the kitchen table and finally called her mother, a conversation she'd been avoiding out of fear since the moment Suwa first appeared at her desk. Mom, she said quietly when the call connected, I need to ask you about Korea. About a company you worked for, a long time ago. There was a long pause on the line, the kind that confirmed everything before a single word was spoken. Suwa found you, her mother finally said, voice soft with old, careful grief. I always wondered if she would, someday. She funded the agency that placed me with her grandson, Zuri said. Mom, what happened back then? Her mother told her, haltingly, about a young woman who'd fallen in love with someone far above her station, about a family that had quietly intervened, about a heartbreak old enough now to have softened into something almost gentle in memory rather than bitter. I left because I was told I'd never truly belong in that world, her mother said. I built a whole life elsewhere instead. I never imagined my own daughter would walk back into that same family and have them choose her instead of asking her to leave. He didn't ask me to leave, Zuri said, throat tight with emotion. He ran through traffic to find me when I tried to leave on my own. Her mother was quiet for a moment, and when she spoke again, her voice was thick with something between old sorrow and new joy. Then maybe this is the universe finally finishing a story it left unfinished 30 years ago. Don't you dare let fear write the ending this time, Zuri. Let him keep choosing you. Let yourself be chosen. Zuri hung up the phone with tears streaming freely down her face, glancing toward the living room where Minho still slept, one arm thrown over his eyes, looking younger and softer than the legend Soul feared. She crossed the room quietly and curled against his side, and even in sleep, his arm tightened instinctively around her, pulling her closer without ever fully waking. Let yourself be chosen, she thought, pressing a kiss to his jaw. I think I finally am. She stayed there the rest of the night, listening to the steady rhythm of his breathing, feeling for the first time in longer than she could remember that the ground beneath her wasn't borrowed or temporary, it was simply, finally, home. Outside the window, Soul glittered on, indifferent to the quiet miracle unfolding in one penthouse among thousands, two people who had both spent their lives bracing for abandonment finally allowing themselves to rest in something steady instead. In the weeks that followed, the scandal dissolved as quickly as it had erupted, the truth spreading just as fast as the original lies once the evidence went public. Minho's empire not only survived but emerged stronger, partners impressed by the composed, transparent way he'd handled the crisis. But the real change wasn't in his business. It was in him. You know, he said one evening, the two of them curled together on his penthouse balcony, the city glittering below like scattered stars. Before you walked into my office that first day, I thought love was a liability. A weakness men in my world couldn't afford. And now, she asked softly, tracing idle patterns against his chest. Now I think it might be the only thing that's ever made me strong enough to survive any of this. He pressed a kiss to the top of her head. I don't know how to thank you for staying. For fighting for something most people would have run from the moment they learned what I really am. I'm not most people, she said simply. And you're not the monster everyone whispers about. You're just a man who was never given a reason to be soft until I showed up demanding my coffee black, no sugar. He laughed, the sound warm and unguarded in a way that still occasionally startled her, even now. I love you, he said quietly, like the words still felt new on his tongue despite weeks of feeling them grow inside him. I don't think I've ever said that to anyone and meant it the way I mean it with you. I love you too, she whispered back, and the city lights blurred slightly behind unshed tears of happiness. Even when you're terrifying. Even when you rearrange entire meetings because of imaginary dizziness. That window genuinely was distracting, he said with mock seriousness, and she laughed so hard she nearly fell off the lounge chair, and he caught her, because of course he did, because that's who he had become for her, the man who always caught her, no matter how far she thought she might fall. Of course, peace this complete rarely stayed untested for long, and the next test arrived not from an enemy, but from an old flame neither of them had asked for. Han Yirin, a stylish former girlfriend of Minho's from his university years, resurfaced at a charity auction the following month, all polished elegance and practiced familiarity, draping a hand across his arm the moment she spotted him across the room. "Minho," she said warmly, eyes flicking briefly, dismissively, toward Zuri. "It's been years. You look exactly the same. Powerful as ever." "Yirin." His voice was polite but cool, already stepping subtly closer to Zuri's side. "This is Zuri. The woman I love." "The woman you love," Yirin repeated, arching a brow with poorly disguised surprise. "How unexpected. I always thought you'd end up with someone more." She paused delicately, suited to this world. The insult was wrapped in silk, but Zuri felt the sting of it regardless. Before she could respond, Minho's hand found hers, fingers laced tight, his expression hardening into something Zuri had only seen directed at men like Sung Jun. "She is suited to this world," he said evenly. "More than anyone I've ever stood beside in it, including you." Zuri has more honesty in one sentence than this entire room manages in an evening. "I'd choose that over polish every single time." Yirin's smile faltered, color rising in her cheeks as several nearby guests pretended not to have heard every word. "Excuse us," Minho added, already guiding Zuri away toward the terrace, leaving Yirin standing alone amid the quiet murmur of a room that had just watched her quietly, devastatingly put in her place. Outside, the night air cool against her flushed cheeks, Zuri let out a shaky breath. "You didn't have to do that." "Yes, I did," he said firmly, turning her to face him, hands framing her face with a tenderness that contradicted the steel in his voice moments earlier. "I spent years letting people like her define what suited to this world even means. I'm done with that. You are not a deviation from what I'm supposed to want, Zuri. You're the correction to everything I got wrong before I found you." "That was very smooth for a man who claims he isn't good with words," she teased, though her eyes were suspiciously bright. "I've had a lot of practice lately," he said, leaning down to press his forehead to hers. "Apparently falling in love makes a man eloquent out of sheer necessity. Otherwise you'd never let me get away with half the things I do." She laughed, threading her arms around his neck, the sting of the evening already dissolving beneath the warmth of his certainty. "Take me home," she murmured. "I've had enough of this world for tonight. I'd much rather have just yours." "Always," he said softly, and meant it completely. A month later, on a quiet evening neither of them expected to be remarkable, Minho took her to the rooftop garden of the very building where they'd met, the same glass tower, the same skyline, but everything between them entirely transformed. "I had a whole speech prepared," he admitted, visibly nervous in a way she had never once seen from him, not even during board meetings or scandal investigations. "I practiced it in front of the mirror like an idiot. My assistant, the one who replaced you for the afternoon, caught me muttering to myself and looked genuinely concerned for my mental health." "You replaced me for an afternoon?" "Temporarily. Strictly so I could plan this without you reading upside down off my desk the way you always do." His hands were visibly trembling now, betraying the calm voice he was fighting to maintain. "Please let me finish before I lose my nerve entirely." "Minho, what?" He knelt before she could finish the sentence, pulling a small velvet box from his jacket, hands steadier now that the moment had actually arrived. "Zuri. The day you fell through my office door, I thought you were an inconvenience. Within a week, you were the only person whose opinion I actually care about. Within a month, you were the reason I started believing I could be a better man than the one this city made me into. I don't want an empire if you're not standing beside me in it. I don't want any version of my future that doesn't start every single morning with you." He opened the box, revealing a ring far simpler than anyone in his world would have expected from a man of his wealth, elegant, understated, exactly her. "Marry me," he said softly. "Not because it's strategic. Not because it makes sense on paper. Just because every bit of you is sweet, and I intend to spend the rest of my life proving I deserve to keep all of it. Tears streamed freely down her face as she nodded, unable to speak past the overwhelming flood of emotion, finally choking out a watery yes that he caught with his lips before she'd even fully finished the word. News of the engagement spread through Seoul's business circles within days, and with it came one final, unexpected complication. Min-ho insisted on a public announcement, a deliberate, defiant statement to every person who had ever doubted whether a woman like Zuri belonged at his side. "Are you sure?" she asked the night before, nerves fluttering as she smoothed the fabric of the announcement dress laid across the bed. "Once this is public, there's no taking it back. Every rumor, every comparison, every cruel comment people whispered before, it's all going to come back tenfold." "Let it," Min-ho said simply, coming to stand behind her, arms wrapping around her waist as he met her eyes in the mirror. "I spent 15 years letting this city believe I was untouchable because I felt nothing. Now I want them to know exactly what touched me, and exactly how unwilling I am to ever let it go. Let them talk. I only care what one person in this entire city thinks of me, and she happens to be standing right here." The announcement dinner, held in the same glass-walled venue where Yirin had once tried to diminish her, became instead the moment Seoul's elite finally understood what Min-ho had known for months, that Zuri was not an exception to be explained away, but the standard everyone else had simply failed to meet. Their wedding took place 6 months later in a quiet garden ceremony just outside the city, far from the cameras and whispers of Seoul's elite, surrounded only by the people who had earned a place in their genuinely happy, hard-won life. Suah sat in the front row, dabbing her eyes with a delicately embroidered handkerchief, quietly delighted at how thoroughly her old, complicated guilt had transformed into the one thing she'd never dared hope for, a love story instead of a debt repaid. Zuri wore a dress that celebrated every curve she had once been told to hide, ivory silk that moved like water, sleeves of delicate lace, a silhouette chosen specifically because it made her feel, for the first time in her life, entirely undeniable. When she stepped through the garden archway, golden afternoon light spilling through rows of cherry blossoms, Min-ho's composure, the same composure that had unsettled boardrooms and silenced rivals for 15 years, broke completely. He pressed a hand briefly to his mouth, eyes glassy, unable to look away from her the entire slow walk down the aisle. "You're not allowed to cry before I even reach you," she whispered teasingly once she stood before him, her own eyes suspiciously bright. "Too late," he murmured, voice thick with emotion. "You ruined every plan I had to stay composed today the moment you walked through that archway." Their vows were simple, unscripted, stripped of the polish that defined every other event in his world. Min-ho spoke of the first day she dropped a stack of files on his office floor and somehow, in the chaos of scattered paper, rearranged the entire architecture of his heart without either of them noticing until it was already done. Zuri spoke of learning, slowly and against every defense she'd built over a lifetime of being told she didn't fit certain rooms, that the right person doesn't ask you to shrink to belong, he simply widens the room until you fit exactly as you are. When he finally kissed her as her husband, the small garden erupted into applause, and somewhere near the back, even Junwoo, invited, against everyone's expectations, as a quiet gesture of peace now that old rivalries had settled into wary respect, found himself oddly moved, raising his glass along with everyone else. By the following spring, the penthouse that had once felt like a glass fortress echoed instead with laughter, with the soft chaos of a small nursery being prepared down the hall, with paint swatches and tiny shoes scattered across furniture that had once held nothing but contracts and quiet, controlled danger. Zuri found him one evening standing in the half-finished nursery, hands braced on the crib railing, an expression on his face she'd never seen on the devil of Uedo, something unguarded, something almost frightened by how much he already loved the child he hadn't even met yet. "Scared?" she asked softly, leaning into the doorway. "Terrified," he admitted, turning to pull her gently against him, hand resting over the soft swell of her stomach with a reverence that still occasionally stole her breath. "I spent my whole life learning how to be feared. I have absolutely no idea how to be soft enough for this." "You've been practicing for months," she said, covering his hand with hers. "Every sandwich you left on my desk. Every meeting you moved because of an imaginary dizzy spell. Every time you chased me down at a cafe instead of letting me run. You've been soft this entire time, Min-ho. You just called it strategy. He laughed, low and warm, resting his forehead against hers. Every bit of you is sweet, he whispered, the words worn smooth now from months of repetition, but no less true than the very first time he'd said them in a rain-streaked car outside her apartment. I used to think that sentence was the most dangerous thing I'd ever said out loud. Now I think it might be the truest. Outside, the city stretched on beneath them, the ports he still controlled, the empire that still bore his name, the legend that would always follow him through Seoul's darker corners. But none of it mattered the way it once had. Somewhere along the way, between stolen kisses and scandal and a grandmother's quiet decades-old guilt finally settling into peace, Kang Min-ho had built something far more valuable than any empire, a home, a family, a love loud enough to drown out every whisper that had ever told either of them they didn't deserve this. Every bit of you is sweet, he murmured one final time, the sun setting gold over the city he once ruled through fear, and now shared in peace beside the only woman who had ever made him want to be more than the legend everyone feared. And for the first time in his entire life, Kang Min-ho wasn't afraid of anything at all. Thank you for watching till the end. If this story made your heart race, don't forget to like, subscribe, and drop a comment telling me which moment hit you hardest, and stay tuned, because the next dark romance is already on its way.